Hi, I'm Bill Alexander, the Executive Director of the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial, which sits adjacent to our world-class museum. The mission of the National Law Enforcement Museum is to tell the stories of American law enforcement, its history, and the individuals working to shape the future of the law enforcement profession. In recognition of Pride Month, we are launching 2 initiatives that will introduce audiences to the history of LGBTQ+ officers in law enforcement. For the first time, we are telling the comprehensive story of this community of officers through a digital exhibit that combines historic context with interviews and artifacts, as well as presenting today's program, Pride Behind the Badge, where we will hear from a panel of LGBTQ+ officers at various stages in their careers who will share their experiences as law enforcement professionals, how they found support within the profession, and discuss their insights about the future of LGBTQ+ representation in this esteemed profession. Our program today is being broadcast in conjunction with the release of the digital exhibit titled Pride Behind the Badge, a history of LGBTQ+ in law enforcement, which we invite you to visit on the museum's website at the conclusion of today's program. Both the digital exhibit and our panel discussion are being sponsored by Target, our partner in telling compelling stories within law enforcement that helps to bring law enforcement and the communities they serve closer together. Thank you, Target. Facilitating this conversation today is Greg Miraglia, retired Deputy Police Chief of the Napa Valley Railroad Police Department and current founder and president of Out to Protect, Inc. Greg's organization seeks to create a greater awareness of the gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender professionals working in law enforcement, and to support those pursuing a law enforcement career through educational programming and professional development. And now we present Pride Behind the Badge.
Hi, everyone, and happy Pride Month. Welcome to this panel discussion. We're happy to have you all here. I'm going to begin by introducing the panel briefly, and then we'll jump right into the discussion. I'm Greg Miraglia. I'm the CEO and founder of Out to Protect. And we have with us today Julie Callahan, who's the CEO and founder of Teacups International, Chief Don Mueller from the Cerritos College Police Department, Lieutenant Brandon Reagan from the Orange County Sheriff's Office in Florida, and Deputy Anthony Casper from the Solano County Sheriff's Office in California. Thank you all for being with us this morning. Don, I'm going to start with you. Because I think you were one of the first to witness the initial coming out of LGBT law enforcement personnel when you started. Take us back to that time. What was the environment like when you got hired, and what enabled you to come out?
Well, it was definitely a different era than today, without question. I hired with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department in 1990, January of 1990. And at that time, there were no openly gay, lesbian, definitely not trans officers or deputies in 99% of the country. There were none in Southern California outside of a handful in San Francisco. Up until that time, our agency, along with pretty much every agency in California, fired people for being, if they acknowledged the fact that they were gay or lesbian, they were fired. Every officer in history, 150-year history of the LA County Sheriff's Department had been fired that ever acknowledged the fact publicly that they were gay. And when I got hired, they were still asking. We didn't have legal protections in the state of California at that time. Sexual orientation was not one of the categories that was listed under protected classes in 1990. So it was illegal to discriminate. And during background investigations, during hiring processes, they asked straight out if you'd ever had sexual relations with a member of the same sex. And if you answered yes, you would not be hired. At that time, I lied. I straight out lied in my backgrounds, lied to my background investigator, and lied on my polygraph. And I passed, which is kind of proof polygraph doesn't always work perfectly. I was able to fool all that. I think a lot of that was because I just did not meet the stereotype, what my background investigator stereotyped as somebody who was gay. I had grown up in the church, religious family, had actually been married to a woman previously when I was still in my confusion stage in coming to terms with who I was when I was very young at 20. So in his mind, I was divorced. I was working as an assistant pastor in a church. Just did not fit his stereotype.
Mhm.
The atmosphere in law enforcement at that time was still very anti-LGBTQ to an extreme. That did not change until the early 90s. In Southern California, and it kind of rippled across the country. 90% of the country was the same way. There were 2 or 3 officers in New York City that had come out, 1 or 2 in San Francisco PD that had come out, but they were all facing pretty hostile work environments at the time. In LA, we had an LAPD officer, Mitch Groveson, and an LA County Sheriff's Deputy, Bruce Bowen, who were both fired in 1989 for the departments used other reasons, but it's when they found out they were gay, they fired them both. And both of them have filed multi-million-dollar lawsuits against the departments. Those 2 lawsuits settled, both of them, with the LA County Sheriff and LAPD in 1992, with the departments agreeing to change our policies and add sexual orientation into our protected classes. It was lawsuits, in all honesty, that began the change of what we saw in law enforcement. A handful of us decided to publicly come out right after the settlement of those lawsuits, about 2 to 3 months after the settlement. There were 2 of us in the LA County Sheriff's Department, myself being one, and 3 LAPD officers, and we all came out the same summer together. And we walked in the parade for the first time in 1993, was our first year walking in the parade in uniform. And it was tough. It was tough, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
We had officers on the parade route turning their backs on us as we walked down the parade. It was a different time. Most of us had good relations with the officers we worked with. The people who knew us, we didn't have problems with. But it was all the rest of the officers and deputies in our departments that didn't know us that held on to those stereotypes and saw us as an affront to what they believed law enforcement represented.
Well, it took a lot of courage for sure. Julie, you had a very similar courageous experience working for the 10th largest law enforcement agency in the nation. And you were the first to transition as a trans woman. Tell us about that experience and how that all went.
I came on the department in 1981 in a very unfriendly environment for trans people. And I was not out until about 1998, about 3 years before I transitioned. And people were pretty hostile within the department. As I was trying to explain, I sat down with 1,100 of my coworkers and tried explaining to them what a transgender person was, and met with various degrees of success. Some were, very positive, some were not, and there were people who were in the middle. And it was a very difficult time for me individually, because there was no one else at the department that was out. Come to find out later that there were several people who were trans but not out at the department. And, that gave me hope, but it still made it very difficult during the time period when I first came out, and then up until the time I left the agency in 2010. So I spent 20 years in male form and 10 years in female form at San Jose PD, and then went on to a different department.
Awesome. Definitely a pioneer. And Brandon, you're across the country from Dawn and Julie in a different place in Florida. Talk about your experience. What was it like for you when you first got into law enforcement as a gay man?
So I started with the Orange County Sheriff's Office back in 2003, where I was not openly serving as LGBTQ plus. So I think a lot of that back in that time, it wasn't really talked about, but I knew of other individuals within our agency that were LGBTQ plus, but they weren't open with other people about it within the organization. So that led to me starting my career here, and probably I share this openly and transparently with our local community to empower individuals in the same position as me, becoming a victim of domestic violence, which was the opening of my coming out story right on the job. And then not only my colleagues, but my friends and my family who weren't really close to me at the time, finding out about me identifying as a gay male. So when that happened in the early years of my career, I was devastated because I'm like, you hear all the rhetoric internally amongst the ranks about what people think about the LGBTQ plus population. So that was kind of stuck in my head during that time of when this incident happened to me. And then I knew that this was going to open the doors to not only my agency, but my community, my friends, my family, everyone finding out that I identify as a gay individual. So as that transpired, I thought my life was spiraling and coming to an end at the time, not only my career because of everything that I've heard internally, but my personal life as well. But I can truly say it was the complete opposite. So it opened, so many doors for me here locally. So, I'm fortunate in that perspective, because I know a lot of agencies across the country are not as open as our agency. And people had already knew me because I was established here for several years. I grew up within our agency as an explorer. So I already had a reputation around the agency. So that led to people finding out once my story was in the media about my coming out, portion because of being a domestic violence victim, not that I wanted it to, which is one of those things that happen. Everybody was very supportive within the agency. And then that opened the doors up to, other things like, trying to change the culture within law enforcement as a young deputy, showing that you can serve in the ranks of law enforcement from the bottom to the top as an LGBTQ plus individual, having people within the agency be supportive. They came up to me after this incident occurred because the media took it on their own will, and spun it and shot it out to, the community. That's how my agency found out. So as all these things are opening, people are like, we don't care who you are. You're a great cop. You're a good person. You're doing amazing things. And they kind of like, it was completely different than what was transpiring in my head about, I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to, lose my family and my friends and all this, these thousands of things went through your head at one time. So after that happened, agency completely supportive, community completely supportive, family completely supportive. And then that put like a little nugget in my head where I was like, my goal then as a young deputy at the time was to take that and help other people in my same position and change the culture within law enforcement here in Florida and potentially across the nation, right? So that's led to me moving up through the ranks here at the Orange County Sheriff's Office. We started our first LGBTQ plus liaison program shortly after Pulse under then Sheriff Demings, now Mayor Demings. We have a very supportive sheriff now, Sheriff John Mina, who supports our LGBTQ plus liaison program. It's grown over the years since I've started it here. We do training, engaging our agency and our community, and it truly has been a blessing, I should say, on my end, because that's not what I thought it would be 20 years ago, and nor did I think I'd be in the position I am now to lead not only within my agency, but a group of LGBTQ plus liaisons who are doing phenomenal work here in Florida, even during these challenging times that we all know about, and continuing to push forward and, make change within law enforcement, not only here locally, but across the country. And we're doing that with this program that we built from the time that I've come out till now. Being honored to be the first person appointed to that within the agency because nobody was wanting to step up because of the challenges that that's perceived on our end as LGBTQ plus individuals, and just continuing to push forward. So overall, you asked me 20 years ago, I would never have thought we would be where we are today. We still got a lot of work to do, but we've come a long way.
Yeah. Well, I want to come back and talk about that liaison program in a little bit later in this discussion.
Definitely.
But I've often said that law enforcement's about 20 years behind the rest of society in terms of its evolution and in this case, acceptance of LGBT folks. Anthony, you started your career like I did and like Brandon did as a cadet. So take us back, set the stage for us. What year was it when you started, and what did you learn about being gay in law enforcement?
So I started in 2003 as a cadet. For me, I've always known that I was gay pretty much my whole life. Kind of always knew based off where I grew up that being gay wasn't okay. I grew up in a Catholic household, a very conservative county. But there was always that little part of me that hoped that, hey, one day I can live my true self. Getting into law enforcement, I didn't have no family members or friends that were in law enforcement, so I really didn't know what to expect. But I knew that my dream was to be a cop one day. So I became a cadet. I was 13 years old, and I passed everything, get through the backgrounds, everything, and I'm starting my career, and things are looking good as a cadet. And then one day I walk in a little early, and I see the chief of police, my mentor at the time, high-fiving officers using very strong homophobic slurs, basically congratulating these officers for using physical force against a gay person. And my heart just sunk. Though, like I said, I really never had plans on being out. There was always that little hope that I could be out one day and be my true self. And that pretty much just shattered that. I went, okay, well, I guess I will be living my life in the closet my entire life because I want to be a cop. And obviously this is not acceptable here. So that was a huge hit for me. But I didn't give up my dream of being a cop. I obviously went through high school, went through college, and then became in the police academy. And that's where I first met a first positive encounter in law enforcement with the LGBT community. And that was meeting you, Greg. It's kind of funny. In the academy, Greg is a professor there, and he does a little, I'll call it scenario, if you will. He walks into the class before we even meet Greg, and he goes, "Tell me who I am." And the cadets raise their hand, and they go, "Oh, you're Mr. Miraglia. You're probably established. You have a wife and kids. You're obviously doing well in your career. You're the dean here." And he goes, "Okay, you got part of that right. I am married. I don't have kids. And I'm married to my husband, Tony." And my mouth just dropped. I went, "Hold on, what did he just say?" And then he goes on to say that he worked for that same agency that I was a cadet for. I went, all right, there's a joke. A joke is coming. Here comes the inappropriate joke. And then I come to learn that, no, it's all very real and very true. And my mind was blown, as silly as that sounds. So 21 years old I am, meeting for the first time a gay officer where I truly believe I was going to be the only gay officer in the world, as silly as that may sound. But I was sheltered where I grew up. I didn't know any better. So something came to me where I was like, I have to talk to Greg. I have to find out this guy's story. And Greg was the first person that I ended up coming out to. And then from there, my life just fast tracked. So that was January 20th of 2012, I came out. I came out to my parents a week later, which was up and down. And then I ended up coming out to my class during our community-oriented policing project. And what I received from my class, I would have never thought I would receive from anyone in law enforcement in 1,000 years. The overwhelming support and love that I received from my class for just basically telling them, this is me. I haven't changed. This is my story. My mind was blown. I'll never, ever forget that feeling for the rest of my life. So I definitely had more of a positive coming out story than probably most in law enforcement. I did have some crash and burns with family and some law enforcement friends growing up in the law enforcement community. Eventually those people came around and everything's good now. But there was, without a doubt, starting earlier as a 13-year-old kid in 2003, there was definitely a lot of still hate then. And unfortunately, I'm comfortable to say there's still hate now, but we are definitely on a progress track of doing better in law enforcement than we were in 2003. And it comes from doing things like this, talking about it. So.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, and Don, one of the things I think that has really helped us in terms of becoming more visible and in growing support are some of the early LGBTQ plus law enforcement organizations that formed. Give us a sense of that, and how did that all work with the whole don't ask, don't tell thing that was still in place in the military?
Well, in the very beginning, the organizations that we did form were pretty undercover, as we might say, kind of in the don't ask, don't tell thing. Back in the early 90s, myself in LA on the West Coast, there were really only 2 or 3 organizations in the country GOAL, the Gay Officers Action League in New York City. There was a smaller division of GOAL in the Mid-Atlantic, more Washington, D.C. and Philly area. I think Florida was starting up, but they were pretty small. And then on the West Coast, we formed an organization called Guns and Hoses, which was made up of cops and firefighters. And at that time, most of us were mainly doing just social support. We really weren't at the point of fighting for political change or policy changes or benefits or any of those kinds of things. That came much later. In the beginning, most of us just felt, much like Anthony said, a lot of us came into law enforcement feeling like we were the only one. That am I the only gay cop out here? So all of us in those early days realized we needed to provide a support network for our people, even if they can't be out at that point in their agency. So we built a big organization, and so did GOAL in New York, of doing barbecues and pool parties and retreats. And in LA, we had in the early 90s easily up to 300, 350 members, active members, mostly made up from LAPD, LA County Sheriff, and a lot of the smaller agencies all over LA and Orange County here in Southern California. And it was a great success in the way that it helped us meet other people who were doing the same job we were.
Right.
So we didn't feel alone. So we didn't feel like we were the only one. It gave us strength, is what it did internally and personally, and gave a few of us enough strength to begin to ease out of the closet and start some visibility. During the late 90s and early 2000s, we saw that start to transform into more official organizations. Here in Southern California, Pride Behind the Badge developed out of Guns and Hoses, where a few of us were then out and willing to meet with heads of departments, with chiefs and with sheriffs, and start pushing for domestic partnership benefits, start pushing for protections and policy, and some of those things. And we saw those start to evolve in the early 2000s, where we became a combination of both social support, but also a voice for change, voice for training in the academies and providing LGBTQ diversity training to recruits. A lot of that was very new. Late 90s, early 2000s, there were only a handful of us in the country teaching those classes. But that came out of those organizations, is where it came from. That gave us a pool of experts, people strong enough to teach, and gave us credibility when we presented to chiefs and sheriffs, because we were coming from within the organization. We weren't just people outside demanding, as they saw, some left-wing activists. We were part of the department. And we were good employees that have built reputations and achieved positions of rank, and voicing, we are here. This is not just about teaching diversity for outside. This is also within our organizations. We need to create safe space for our own employees. It's not about hiring LGBTQ. We're already here. Right. We're in the departments. So those early organizations really helped create a lot of the strength among our own people, a lot of support among our own, and started the true spark of change within department policies and department practices and recruitment and training and all that. It really came out of those organizations. So we saw those start to grow all over the country.
Well, and you talk about the numbers, the sheer numbers. Those organizations made it clear that it wasn't just about one person here or there.
Absolutely.
Julie, you started the international transgender community of police and sheriffs, and you now have, I think you last told me, over 3,000 members. How did this organization come about, and how has it supported law enforcement?
Teacups came about out of a study that was done by Tom Whetstone, who was a professor at Southern Police Institute in Kentucky. He began interviewing transgender officers who were very closeted at the time. Very few were out. I was not out when I initially took the survey, but came out shortly thereafter while the survey was in progress. And there was about 18 or so transgender officers from the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, and Australia and New Zealand. And those people participated in the study, but we began exchanging emails back and forth and created an email thread, which led to the formation of Teacups, because we all thought we were the only one. And we came to find out that that was in fact not the case. So we formed a Yahoo group and began searching out our contacts and inviting them to the group. That has grown from 18 officers to about 7,000 officers over the last 25 years.
Wow.
And we've grown internationally to 36 countries, the predominant numbers being here in the United States, with about 4,000 transgender officers or people that identify as trans, gender fluid, gender queer, gender non-binary, gender non-conforming, or gender questioning, and gender fluid. And those officers came in and many of them thought they were the only ones. So basically they started reaching out to their contacts who invited more people and so on. And we began to grow. Initially, we began as just a peer support group, but we branched out to education and advocacy and started reaching out to policymakers and executives within agencies.
That's awesome. What a resource and what a gift to law enforcement you provide. Brandon, let's talk about Florida. There are a number of organizations that have grown in that state. Don mentioned the legal and the goal groups. If you could explain maybe the differences there, if there are any, and what's your sense about the groups and what those meant to you?
So I know, like back in 2003, they had Florida Legal, which was a LGBTQ plus law enforcement group. I was not a part of it at the time, but it was very well known at the time, and since then it's dissipated. And then they had a gap in time where it was like, what are LGBTQ plus organizations are out there? And that's kind of when GOAL took over in Central Florida within the last, more recently over the last 5 years. And it's a branch of GOAL in New York, obviously, where we work closely with them. And, it's important because we need a sounding board for not only we have a lot of local LGBTQ plus law enforcement liaisons. So it's important for not only us to engage within our agencies, but also show our true perspective and that we're human outside of the badge. And we do that through GOAL. So through GOAL CFL, we're about 140 members now strong here in Central Florida. We service all the surrounding counties with around Orange County. And, it's important just because not only do these LGBTQ plus officers have a safe place to go and talk about maybe some internal problems they had, because that's why GOAL was initially created, was to advocate for those officers, obviously, and deputies. And when I say that, I'm saying officers, deputies, corrections, anyone within the criminal justice field. If there was challenges within the workplace, right? Fortunately, here in Central Florida, we have great leadership who supports the LGBTQ plus community. And it's kind of morphed into more of a community-oriented program where we're doing a lot of work within the community. We're bridging gaps that are perceived out there by maybe our trans family and things like that. So GOAL here started more recently, but again, like I said, Florida Legal was around, but I wasn't obviously open at the time to be engaged with something like that at the time back in 2003. But highly important to have those networking groups here.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So Anthony, I want to shift a bit and talk about pride parades. And I remember very distinctly marching with you the very first time in uniform in the San Francisco Pride Parade. Talk about what that experience was for you. What was it like that first time that you got to be part of a community and also be part of your law enforcement community?
I've been thinking about this one a lot, and it's a hard one to describe. The feeling that you get when you're around the corner onto Market Street and you're looking down Market Street and there's over 1 million people lining the streets. How I can accurately describe how that made me feel, I just can't, other than it was an overwhelming sense of joy, support. It was an amazing feeling. Never something I ever, once again, would have thought of in my entire life ever happening to me. The reason why the parade was so important for me was not only was it a stepping stone for me of coming out of confidence and saying and embracing who I am and basically showing the public this is me, but I was also able to represent my agency wearing my agency's uniform and showing that I'm not the only one. I'm marching with other law enforcement officers from multiple different agencies that we're here. We're part of your community. We support you. It's not an us versus them mentality, and that we're all one, right? And that's the goal. We can't exist without our community. There's no one to protect if there's not a community out there. And at least I knew growing up in law enforcement, there was this divide. And now this was a part of me saying, hey, I'm not only am I here and part of your community, I am also one of you. And so it was just an overwhelming experience that I can't accurately describe how it made me feel, other than so proud to be not only in law enforcement, but to be myself. I wish I had more words. I don't.
Yeah, I think you'd have to be there to hear the roar of the crowd.
Right.
Deafening, as we
Yes.
walked around, turned the corner onto Market Street. Incredible. When I think about all of the stories that you all have shared spanning the last 40 years, it really is pretty remarkable, the change, albeit slow, that we've seen. I mean, we have a lot of legal protections in place now for LGBT people. And for law enforcement, we have LGBT people working in all ranks, from entry level all the way to executive positions. Don, you're a chief, you're out. Talk about the importance of being out and a visible leader in law enforcement today.
Greg, visibility is everything. Visibility is how we create change. I believe 100% in training. Absolutely. It's absolutely necessary. It's required. We need to have training, but training alone does not change people. If we have an officer or an employee who is racist or homophobic or transphobic, you can put them through all the classes you want and it won't change them. What changes people is relationships, is knowing somebody, becoming friends with someone. If you're a racist and you can't stand Latino people, you can go to all the classes you want. I can give you all these facts and statistics. It won't change them until they become friends with somebody who's Latino. And they go home and have dinner with them and realize, hey, I actually kind of like this person. And wow, we actually have things in common. And it's relationship that changes people. And you can't have that without being visible. If we stay hidden and stay in the shadows and refuse to acknowledge who we care about and who we love and who we go home to, and nobody knows us or sees us, change will never happen. I think it's vitally important. Absolutely, I understand the need for support systems behind the scenes, because a lot of our community struggles with being rejected by family and by church and by pastors and by priests, and that need for a support system to build self-esteem and build the strength to be able to do that. But once we reach that point that we know we're okay and we're exactly who we're supposed to be and we're good at our jobs, then at that time, I think we need to be able to have the courage to step out and be proud of who we love. Every other member in this place is proud of their wives and proud of their girlfriends. We should be proud of our husbands and our boyfriends or our girlfriends the same way. It's not pushing an agenda. It's not getting in somebody's face. It's just being human, being normal, talking about our lives just like everyone else talks about their lives when they come to work.
Yeah.
And just helping other people realize we have far more in common than they think, but they won't know that unless we share with them. And to do that, we've got to be visible. We've got to be out.
Totally agree. Julie, what are you hearing from your organization, the members of your organization? I mean, right now, there are so many pieces of legislation across the U.S. and state legislatures that seem to be really attacking the trans community. It's got to be scary. Talk about the importance, though, of those trans officers in the rank and file today of being out.
I think it is really scary for people. I think they feel oppressed by the government in certain states. I think they feel afraid of their communities turning on them the way that they seem to have in many regards. And it's not everybody, but it's enough people to make it very uncomfortable. I think a lot of our officers are not coming out right now because of the political environment. I think the officers that are out are being very low key about their presentation and stuff, but we're urging them to stand up and to be to represent the community, because if we're not seen, much like Don said, if we're not seen, people forget about us. They forget we're there. And if we stand up and basically project that good professional image, which is, most of the transgender people that are in law enforcement that I know are really high overachievers. They do very good work. They're SWAT cops, they're homicide detectives, they're sexual assault detectives. They work in leadership positions. They do pretty much any job and every job that's possible. And we need the non-LGBTQ plus community to see that, and to see that we are capable, that we are human, and that we're able to do the job and excel at it.
Right. Totally agree with you. Anthony, let's talk about wellness a bit. That's a big conversation in law enforcement today. And from an officer wellness perspective, how does being out and working in a supportive workplace promote officer wellness?
Well, I think it goes back to what the chief and Julie was saying is, as a law enforcement officer, you will spend 10, 12, 16, 18, sometimes 20-hour shifts with these partners of yours that you basically spend more time with them than you do your own spouses, family members. So it becomes a family. And if you're not out, or if you don't feel comfortable being out, how do you have a good working relationship with these people that you spend the majority of your time with, more than your own personal family? So being out and having that, you can be a little more relaxed. You can talk openly about things. Maybe you're having issues at home, you're having issues at work. You're building trust within your partner. And so, the example I like to use is being around a briefing table. So for us, Sunday mornings is our Monday for my side of the week. And we go around the room. People talk about, hey, what'd you do on your days off? And people go, I went with my wife to the winery, or went, with my girlfriend here. And if I'm sitting there telling a lie every single Sunday of what I did my past weekend, then I'm not being truthful not only with my partners, but within myself. And that's going to weigh heavy on me. So luckily for me, I've been out since I worked for the department. And kind of going back to what the chief was saying, being out, being visible, it has changed the mindsets of being the first openly gay deputy for where I work. There was a lot of rumors going around the agency about hiring an openly gay cop. It wasn't very widely accepted. And I've changed a lot of minds, and I've changed a lot of opinions that people had for simply being out and being open. So it goes back to just being the wellness of just, hey, if I can be comfortable with you and you can be comfortable with me, that we can work together. So we see horrific things day in and day out, unfortunately, on this job that most people should never see in their life. And being open and being out, it's allowed me to have that comfortable communication with my partners to help de-stress some of these situations that we see.
Yeah, for sure. Brandon, you've risen through the ranks in your agency and had a very successful career. What advice do you have for LGBTQ members of law enforcement who aspire to higher level of positions in their organizations?
I always say, if I can do it, anybody can do it, right? It's like, that's for certain. But, as I stated earlier, one of my big initiatives after my coming out process occurred was to change the culture within law enforcement. And that was showing not only like current law enforcement officers, but also our youth who are aspiring to be cops like I was at a very young age, that, you have this individual and this team of leaders. Our LGBTQ plus liaison team is a team of leaders making change within the culture of law enforcement, and that they have someone that they can look up to and aspire to and be like, look how far we've come. Yeah, we still have problems. We still have challenges. It's a daily process. But if these individuals can do it starting 20 years ago, look how far we are now, 20 years ahead, and the change that they can make within the next 20 years, because we're really shooting for, like right now, I'm 20 years in, most of us are been around for a while. So we're really aspiring that younger generation that's coming up to take our positions and continue to push forward with all these initiatives that we've started and created. And it takes people to step up like us for the liaison programs and leaders in law enforcement to make sure that that happens. So.
Fantastic. Anthony, you mentioned you were the first openly gay man to be hired as a deputy in your agency, and you've obviously had a very successful career. What did the leaders in your organization do that helped you and supported you in your success?
Well, I think they allowed me to be me. I never once did I ever get a talking to about being too openly out or being too gay or yeah, they just allowed me to be myself. Allowed me, as long as I showed up to work, I did my job, what was expected of me. They didn't hover over me. I'm sure there was many people, I had many eyes on me watching me, see how I would perform. And because everyone just, I was, you know, I like to tell people I was the science experiment, right? They didn't quite know what to expect of me. Fortunately for me, I had many friends that worked for the agency that I worked at prior to working there due to a close family friend. But I think the biggest thing was my agency has always had a very strong stance on their zero tolerance for any type of discrimination. My sheriff's always been big on any type of discrimination. If you're found at fault for discrimination, you're automatically fired. There's no ifs or buts about it. So everyone always kind of known the tone, for lack of better terms, for discrimination. So I think a lot of people in the beginning was very standoffish against me. I think they were worried about what they were going to say, jokingly around, and if I was going to report them or things like that. As like I said, as time went on and they realized that I was no different than them, just because I was gay doesn't make me the science experiment that I'm some different person than them. Things end up working very well for me, fortunately. So the biggest thing I would say my administration was they were just supportive. They allowed me to do my job. I didn't feel like I was being hovered over by them. And luckily for me, it all just kind of worked out in the long run.
Sounds like good leadership from the top.
Yeah.
Let's shift to the communities that we serve. Don, talk about the importance of LGBTQ people out in the community being able to see themselves represented in the rank and file of law enforcement.
You know, Greg, all communities that have been discriminated against or disenfranchised need to see visible change in the police agencies that serve their community. And in order to create trust, the community needs to see people who look like them or represent them within the police agencies that are supposed to be serving them. If they don't see community that represents them, you already have a basis for no trust. I mean, a great example of that is look at Ferguson. Ferguson, we had a 90-some% Black community being patrolled by a 90-some% white police agency. It's a recipe for disaster. If the community doesn't see themselves in the police agency that is serving them, there's no trust, and they need to be able to see that change. And that includes our community. As an LGBTQ community, we have had a history of lack of trust with police departments across the country and around the world, for that matter. Until they see officers, agents, deputy sheriffs who are out and open, that they can trust, that they can talk to, that they can go to for help, for advice, for direction, they're not going to trust the agency unless they see that and they know that. It speaks to the program you're working on so heavily on, putting on training liaisons across the country, and that Brandon is doing such an amazing job with in Florida, with having visible, identified LGBTQ liaisons in the agency so that the community knows there's somebody that they can go to, that they see that they can trust. That doesn't mean our other officers aren't qualified. That doesn't mean they're not well trained and they don't care about the community. Of course they do. But we've got to get past the history. In the history, there's been so much discrimination that our community needs to see people that represent them, just like any other community,
Sure.
Latino, Asian, Black, Muslim. We need to see ourselves in the community, in the police agencies that are supposed to be providing our protection. And that's how we create trust, through that visibility and those relationships. So I think it's vital to the community that we're visible, and the community needs us to be visible.
Now, Brandon, your agency openly and actively recruits specifically with the LGBTQ plus community. Talk about how you do that.
So just kind of piggybacking off of what Dawn mentioned, it truly is that community aspect of our community members seeing that we have these liaisons that represent them. And we are always doing community engagement. So it's not like just because it's June, it's Pride Month, let's go out there and show off our liaison. This is a 24/7 operation where it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of community engagement, especially from coming as a law enforcement officer into the LGBTQ plus community, to try to bridge gaps that were perceived there. And it's taken us a long time to build those relationships with our community members. So now, as time has progressed, they trust us, they know who to turn to when they have questions. And then specifically from the recruiting aspect, we target our LGBTQ plus community members to come onto our agency for not only our civilian positions, but our sworn positions. We're about an agency of over 3,000 employees with law enforcement and civilian support staff. So we're pretty large, not as large as some of those agencies on the West Coast, but for Florida, that's a pretty big agency. And then, just over time with them seeing the engagement through our liaisons, and then, targeting our recruiting aspects towards the LGBTQ plus community, them knowing that they're represented within our agency already makes individuals more comfortable coming to work here. So it's a big thing for us here at the Orange County Sheriff's Office.
Yeah. Anthony, I know you run your cadet program for the Sheriff's Office you work for. A lot of agencies are trying to grow their own officers, future officers, by having cadet and explorer programs. What can agencies do within these programs to make sure that LGBTQ plus youth, like you were when you started, are welcome and can be open?
I think it's out there recruiting, going to high schools, and just having that open dialogue, and showing that we have other gay officers, lesbian, transgender, gay deputies out there that are being successful in the field of law enforcement, and that they're welcome and accepted here in law enforcement. So it goes back to, once again, showing the community that the agencies are offering a wide, different variety of either different races, different cultures, backgrounds, or sexual orientations, and allowing kids to talk to those officers or deputies and seeing that they can be just like them one day. So yeah, going out and recruiting in schools and just showing a positive environment, I think it's helped our cadet program. We have kids from all different kind of backgrounds. And it's because we can show the public that we have deputies from all different styles of backgrounds that are successful within our rank and file.
I think you're proof positive that you can find someone who's like you in law enforcement and discover that you can be out. It would be great if that would have happened back when you were 13.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Don, agencies across the country are really looking for ways to build trust, as you talked about, within their communities. What are some other effective practices specifically with connecting to the LGBT community that you could recommend?
Much like Brandon said, it needs to be a multitude of things, not just a single once a year event to do. Year round, we need to have continued relationship with all parts of the LGBTQ community for them to truly know us, trust us, and that. I mean, right now, we're recording this during the beginning of June, during Pride Month around the world. One of the things you can see, we actually have a rainbow badge, pride patch, that our officers wear. It's not mandatory. It is absolutely up to them if they want to wear that. But I've got about 20 personnel wearing pride patches right now this month, all month, because that sends a signal to the community that we identify with you, we support you, we're proud of you. A lot of my employees are not gay. They're wearing them. They're just allies. But it sends that signal. We have the progressive pride flag flying from the front of our station right now. And during November and Transgender Day of Remembrance and Visibility, we fly the transgender pride flag from our flagpole along with the US flag. Those send a signal to the community that you're safe. We are a safe space for you. Other things that we do, we attend events year round. Much like Brandon was saying, not just in June, but year round, that are going on in the community that don't need to be policed. We're just there because we want to be there to support the community and make sure you're having a safe time. And anything we can do for the community, let us know. We want to help you be successful. So we attend events. On a college campus, we have a LGBTQ student group that either myself or one of my officers attend on a regular basis, monthly, that we show up just to be a representative, just to be a resource to them, to say, hey, how can we help you? How can we help you succeed in your college education, in your dreams and your goals? Is there any questions you have, issues, things you've been afraid to come talk about, that ticket that you forgot to pay and it's now a warrant? What do? We're here to help you with those things so that you don't need to live in fear and that you can get back to being successful in your life. We want to be a partner with you. We want to be part of your family, your extended family. So it's about year-round connection. And looking for ways, reaching out, not waiting for the community to come to us, but us going to them and saying, hey, how can we help you? What can we do differently? Do you have suggestions for us?
That's a really good point. And I think one of the best ways of doing that we've seen work across the country is LGBT liaison programs. Brandon, I have to hand it to you and your agency, the Orange County Sheriff's Office. You are the first to receive an accreditation for your LGBT liaison program in the country. Tell us about the importance of that LGBT liaison position in your organization and how it helps you connect with your community. Give us some examples.
It's so vitally important because, we say we have liaisons for our agencies and we're doing all these great things, but we're also doing that and demonstrating that through training opportunities like the LGBT Liaison Academy put on through Out to Protect. And then being engaged with our community. So we're educating our LGBTQ plus liaisons here within Central Florida. At the same time, they are representing the community, but there's always that continued growth period, right? Things change, terminology changes, and that's important that our community sees that we're engaged on that training aspect as well, and we are doing that as well. The community knows we have a liaison program right here at our agency as well as other agencies, but what's more important is that you can go through outside accreditations now, like we did through Out to Protect. You can have a peer review board to see if you're meeting certain standards to say this is the best practice across the country. So we're not just saying we're doing it, we're proving that we're doing it, we're accredited for doing it now, we're continuing the education component, and the community sees that, and that really does make a better connection with our community members who identify within the LGBTQ plus area. And then outside too, we have allies that support us as well, and they're just as important to recognize. They see all these wonderful things that we're doing, and they're like, yeah, you have a program. And sometimes that's kind of like the chatter, oh, they got a program, they kind of do their own thing. But no, we have a program. All of our people are engaged in training. We're accredited. We can prove that through these standards that we met and this peer review that we did. So we know we're on the right path to stay successful with our continued engagement and to continue building our program and broadening it out further. And not only through our liaison program, but through our Bold Central Florida chapter as well.
That's great. And, again, I have to hand it to your sheriff. He is clearly supportive, and that makes all the difference in the world for sure.
We are very fortunate here with Sheriff John Mina at the Orange County Sheriff's Office. I love working for him. He is probably the biggest advocate for our LGBTQ plus community here in Central Florida, no doubt.
Bravo. Julie, let's talk about the trans community specifically in these very difficult times. What are some ideas you have for law enforcement agencies and what they can be doing specifically to engage and build trust with the transgender community?
I think the first thing is have the leadership management from the organization, if you will, go out to the community and reach out with their liaison, but show their face as well. Don't just have your liaison go out, but basically own it. Go out and go be part of that interaction with the community. Another big part of that for me is the education of your staff in cultural competency and having them aware of using the right pronouns and using the right name and all the interactions that you have with people, making sure that you're being respectful. And part of that goes into how we used to do enforcement. And you would have officers directing their enforcement towards the LGBT clubs and community centers and bathhouses and things of that nature. And it was totally inappropriate. It was not crime oriented, it was harassment oriented, and we needed to get away from that. So basically changing the culture within the agency is important as well. I think that the officers that are out in the community are able to be approachable. And that means you have to go out and go shake hands and be present at meetings and listen to people's complaints and interact with members of the community. I don't think we have enough of that. And I think the liaison program is a big step in the right direction. I think those are probably the most important things I can say that what I've seen in my time.
Fantastic. Well, our time is almost up, and I want to wrap up this fantastic discussion around maybe one more piece of advice that each of you can offer law enforcement to in any way that is going to strengthen its relationship with the LGBT community, as well as or in support of the people, the LGBT people that work in the rank and file. Don, do you want to start out?
Well, to law enforcement as a whole, I would say, do not be afraid of diversity. Diversity is our strength across, and it's not just LGBTQ, it's across the board, racially, religious, across the board. We are stronger when we have community members within our organization that represent the communities that we are serving, far stronger. So as a whole, we need to embrace that diversity and realize there are good and bad officers of every community, every race, everything. Are we going to have bad gay officers? Absolutely. We're going to have amazing ones also. Are we going to have good straight officers and bad ones? Yes. We have that across every community. We just need to get rid of those stereotypes and open our doors. And to the LGBTQ officers who are out there, know that you should be proud of who you are. You've already accomplished an incredible amount by getting to the position you're in now. Be proud of who you are. Be secure with that. And know that you will get support. If you're proud of yourself, others will be proud of you. It starts within us. And be proud of who that is. We have a great future ahead of us. I saw it the last 30 years, and it's come a long ways. 30 years from now, I can only imagine, like Brandon would say, where's it going to be in the next 30 years? It's going to be good. We're on a great trajectory, and I can't wait to see the change that comes.
Brandon?
I would say it's just having that representation, and I feel that a lot of agencies across the country may question, like, how do I get that started, right? And it's like, you just have to take that one little step to make change and show that you're engaged. And if for any reason that anybody out there that gets to listen to this podcast needs assistance with that, they can always reach out to my agency. We're more than willing to help here at the Orange County Sheriff's Office. They can find us at www.ocso.com/LGBT. That'll take you right to our liaison page. It will show you, engagement with the community. We can help you build a program. And, I've had agencies reach out from across the country already to our agency. So I have a team here that is more than willing to help you. It's just, you have to reach out and take that little nudge and run with it. So it'll be the best thing you ever did.
There are some great resources indeed. Julie?
There are two really big steps that transgender officers have specifically. And one is acknowledging to yourself that you're probably trans or that you are trans. And then the second one is looking for support. And just knowing that you are not alone is a huge thing, and that there are resources and other people with similar experiences that are available to you. And I think for my folks, especially the transgender people coming into our group, or at other agencies that are just trying to make it and retain employment, that's a big thing for them. And, the rest of it will come about, but taking that first step and coming out is huge.
Great. And Anthony, let's wrap it up with you. What's your advice?
Ditto to what everyone said. The big piece of advice that I have followed as after I've came out is actually something I got from your husband, Tony. That is, people are as comfortable with you as you are with yourself. Now, knowing that's easier said than done, but if you're closeted or think of coming out or you just came out, the way you react of coming out, people are going to react and feed off that. And it's worked for me. I've simply just been, hey, this is me, take it or leave it. I want to be part of this team. I want to be part of this community. I want to help this agency. And I'm not here for any drama or any type of ridiculous stories. I want to do my job and go home. And it's worked for me. And luckily for me, people have said, hey, you're no different than us. We see you work hard, you keep your head down, and you get the job done. You're not here looking for a story. You're not here trying to get the spotlight on you. You're not throwing your quote unquote gayness in our face. You're simply just being you and who you are. And it seems like it's worked very well for me. So piece of advice I would give, like I said, is people are comfortable with you as you are with yourself.
Great. Well, Chief Don Mueller, Lieutenant Brandon Reagan, Julie Callahan, Deputy Casper, thank you so much for your time today, for sharing your stories and your expertise. And a big round of thanks to the Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund for hosting us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Greg Miraglia, and our esteemed panel for sharing your experiences during this incredibly important topic. We would also like to again thank Target, whose generous support made this event possible. Today's program is not the only way that we at the National Law Enforcement Museum are celebrating Pride Month. Remember to check out our newest online exhibit, Experience Pride Behind the Badge, a history of LGBTQ+ in law enforcement, which is now live on the museum's website at www.nleomf.org. Among the history discussed in the exhibit, you will also have access to in-depth interviews with our program participants. And if you ever find yourself in Washington, D.C., please pay us a visit at 444 E Street Northwest. Thank you for watching, and we hope to see you again soon.